I have to say this has been a truly fascinating discussion for me. This is my first foray into shaping EDU, and I am so glad that Stephanie happened upon our booth at ASU GSV, because this is kind of how we come together. So thank you, Stephanie, for that. I am Laura Thielander Graf. I'm the Senior Director of Public Relations and Thought Leadership at ECMC Group. And ECMC Group operates across the post-secondary education landscape. We are very focused on connecting learners with the path that makes the most sense for them. Whether that is 4-year, whether that is 2-year, whether that is credentialing, right? And so our goal is to really broaden that aperture, right? So that folks are starting to change the dialogue, right? And that's something that we've been talking about all morning, and breaking down the silos. And so we're right in that wheelhouse, which is just, it's so fantastic to hear what you all are doing. But I think that Stephanie was interested in me in particular because we have been speaking to Gen Z teens since February of 2020, since pre-pandemic and throughout. And we've actually conducted 5 national surveys with these Gen Z teens to gather their insights and thoughts about what they want that post-secondary path to look like. Our 5th survey data is actually just going to come out in a couple of weeks. But I invite you to go to our website. It's called questionthequo.org. And all of our data from our first 4 surveys are out there. But basically what we're finding is that these Gen Z teens, they are incredibly savvy, right? They know what's happening in the world around them, and they really want to create their own path, right? We have seen a 23 percentage point decline in the amount of interest that there is in that 4-year path. They want shorter, they want more affordable, and they want direct to career, right? They realize that they need to be lifelong learners, and they want to get into the workforce much quicker. They don't want to look at that 4-year path. They think it's too long. They think it's too expensive. And they really understand the need for a marketable skill and what that means when they go out to the marketplace, right? So it's really that instead of focusing kind of on that journey of where they're going, they're focusing on where that journey is going to take them. And I think that that's a bit of a shift. And I think that the pandemic has allowed that shift to occur, right? And it's allowed us to kind of normalize discussions beyond kind of what we have in this space. And so I think that we are in a brave new world. I think that there, again, is lots of opportunity. It's super exciting to hear what you all are talking about here. And I have to say, it's kind of like, oh, these people are talking my language. So super excited to be here. And again, I'm not going to get too far in the data, but questionthequo.org will give you all kinds of insights, and happy to connect with you offline. Feel free to shoot me an email or a text, and we can connect further, or happy to answer any questions as well, but really exciting to be here, and thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to learn more about your mission. And I think really understanding the needs and opportunities with incoming generations is so critical. And that's a great segue for our student panel. Something at Shaping EDU that we like to do for every event really is to ensure that there's a foundation of student voice. And so I'm excited to welcome to the virtual stage Helen McDonald and Faith Dalzell, and they're going to be talking about some of their experiences and perceptions around credentials and digital badges. Welcome, Faith and Helen.
Thank you so much for having us, Sam.
If you don't mind, I know our time is limited, but if you don't mind just introducing yourself, giving us some background on whether you have micro-credentials or badges and what kinds. So Faith, let's start with you.
Jump in.
Oh, Helen, you go first.
Oh no, I was just asking Faith if she wanted to start.
I am more than happy to kick us off. So my name is Faith Dalzell. I am no longer a current student, but I graduated from ASU this past May and will actually be returning for a master's program in a few months. And so I serve as the first and only Learning Enterprise Fellow here at ASU. And while I myself do not have any micro credentials or badges currently, the Learning Enterprise is really working at meeting learners at any stage in life. And that is obviously something that can be done using micro credentials and badges. And so I think that there's this really natural pathway to really introduce micro-credentials and badges at any stage in a learner's life. But I'm interested in kind of where this conversation is going of what happens when we introduce them earlier. So say high school or before college or during college.
Thank you so much, Faith. And Faith, you're sort of a perennial panelist here at Shaping EDU. And, I know the Learning Enterprise and President Crow really, defines our mission as supporting lifelong or universal learners. And so I like to think we're all students, we're all learners here still. So pleased to have you again, Faith. Thank you. Helen, over to you.
Okay, hi. So I'm Helen. I am a fourth-year student at the University of Puget Sound. I've actually just recently made the decision to take a fifth year just to go part-time and kind of ease myself into a career. One thing I think is really important is it can be a really, really sharp transition from being a learner and somewhat of an academic to just working in a job. I wasn't ready, so I'm taking another year, and I think it's interesting to be here and hear this kind of viewpoint. I'm actually a double major in biology and economics, and I have 2 minors in music and chemistry. I'm thinking of going along the graduate school path in something applied, probably statistics or data analytics, something like that. As an econ student, I'm pretty familiar with signaling and with signals that we send out to employers and the screening that employers do for candidates, right? So I think this entire conversation is really, really interesting. I'm actually planning to write my senior thesis on signaling and perhaps even employment. So great to be here.
So pleased to have you both. So when you were starting your higher education journey, were badging and micro-credentials part of the conversation yet? If so, how? Faith, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to kick off this conversation. I actually went to high school back on the East Coast, and my high school was one of the top 10 in the nation. And what they really focused on was more that traditional AP or IB courses that could later transfer into college credit. Looking back, I definitely now wonder what it would look like to replace AP and IB programs in high school with this more kind of real world credentialing or badging that might hold more weight on a resume, and how that would then influence student employment during their time in college, or if they decide to take a gap year in between high school and college, how having credentials might kind of change the path that they choose to pursue. Similarly, when I was in college, I definitely heard of a few colleagues and peers mentioning badging programs and micro-credentialing programs, specifically through more kind of data analytics boot camps, because I think that a lot of it is kind of centered more in those STEM areas right now. And I know that for a majority of students, they were really drawn into programs that had employers like Google with the name attached. And so I think as we kind of enter into this conversation, it's how do you spread awareness that there are so many different pathways with micro-credentials and badging that students may not be aware of right now, because there's definitely a more narrow kind of perception of where these different programs are located and what fields they're located in and what careers they're targeting. And I think that there's really an opportunity right now, as a lot of people are reassessing where their career paths are taking them, what these programs could evolve into. And so that's something that I think we will continue to see. I think that we will also continue to see an interest in this as students look towards non-traditional pathways in learning and what learning will look like in that lifelong journey right now.
Thanks, Faith, so much for sharing. Helen, what about your experience along the way, at least, starting out in your, from the first year to the fifth year of your higher education journey? How has your experience with the perception of micro-credentials and badges shifted?
Well, I actually had a pretty non-traditional high school experience, because I carved out my own path and decided to leave high school 2 years early and graduate at 15. I think in the environment I was in at my high school, it was something that I really had to take on myself and be very independent, and seeking that out and finding online courses. And in a way, I took online courses before they were really popular, right? I think in a sense, I almost got familiar with this idea of just getting it done, showing the administration that I'm capable of that skill so I could get out of high school and go to college. And so I think the idea of micro-credentialing is pretty attractive to me for students who maybe just don't have the sense of advocacy or assertiveness that every teenager has So I think making it available in high schools would be a really good choice to mobilize students and help push them towards the learning outcomes that they want to see. I think going to college at 16 maybe isn't for everyone, but it's something that most everyone could accomplish if they're given the right skill set. So I think making that more accessible to everyone instead of just, tamping them down or saying, oh, well, it's not time for that yet would would really help further education, happiness, and, career paths.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think more and more we're going to see alternative journeys around learning, because there is clearly no one way to acquire knowledge, demonstrate it. And I think badging and credentials fill a space also of self-directed and informal learning. If you are a student of Khan Academy, YouTube, Discord, or whatever it is, and you're able to acquire and apply those skills in constructive ways, how are we able to show for it? I remember in some of my initial experimentations with badging earlier on in my career, there were a lot of conversations around the acceptance by employers, by the workforce. And that, that acceptance was needed actually to propel badges into mainstream use. So as you navigate and anticipate, your post-college or your current career journeys, what do you wish employers knew about or took into account about credentials, badging, and informal learning? Faith, let's start with you.
I think that there's definitely a need to normalize having credentials and badges on resume. So, it's really this idea of meeting learners with where they're at. And so for a lot of learners, if they're looking to explore a new area of expertise, if they're looking to gain kind of new skills, you're not going to go and invest in a new college degree likely. You want to dip your toes into the water a little bit more and kind of be able to double check before you make an investment that's that large. And so I think that there's a need to understand that when you have multiple credentials or badges in an area, that can oftentimes qualify you more in some ways, because these different pathways usually have, at least from my personal experience, a little bit more of this exposure aspect of getting those real world practice skills in place and having applied knowledge. And so I think having this idea of looking for resumes in a more holistic point of view and looking for that applied knowledge component, not just did you sit in a seat for X amount of hours and pass the class, is something that I am really looking forward to exploring more. I will also say that I think it's equally hard from an employer standpoint. I myself right now am in the midst of interviews for our next fellowship cohort, and it's hard to understand what you should look for on a resume and understand, what do you think is most important moving forward? And so I think that having more open conversations in between those who are providing the badging and credentialing and explaining why it's valuable to employers, as well as why it's valuable to learners, and making sure that there's kind of this shared benefits is something that needs to happen. And so my answer is always going to be conversation. I think it's a conversation that needs to start within high schools. I think it's a conversation that needs to start at colleges like ASU about, what does it look like to maybe break down the traditional college journey a little bit more and make it more accessible. And then it also changes over to employers, and how do we make employment more accessible, and how do we really focus on workforce mobility and social and economic mobility as well.
Wow, Faith, you're really hitting, I think, on the heart of shaping EDU and actually what change making is, which is a continued conversation between industry, higher education, K-12. None of us can exist in a vacuum and expect, there to be progress. So thank you so much for sharing today. And we're going to wrap things up with you, Helen, and asking you the same question. What do you wish employers knew or took into consideration with badging and credentials to shape the best possible future workforce?
I think there's definitely a credibility issue, like you said, Faith and Sam. I think definitely is one. I think that was a problem that was existing with undergraduate degrees until they really started to take off, whenever that was. And so now having an undergraduate degree is considered an extremely credible signal that you are, ready to work. And depending on how well you did in college, right, that's going to inform the kind of job that you get. But I'm seeing a lot in the chat about maybe how the skills that we learn in high school are just to get us into college. What we learn in college isn't even necessarily to get us in the workforce, it's to get us through college. But the idea here is that college is just a signal to get us into the workforce. And so I think it would take a major cultural shift for employers to kind of remove that bias that having a 4-year degree has on entering the workforce, because I think it's a major one. I think another thing is part of the bias comes from the idea that going to college represents a certain amount of academic rigor and challenge that not everyone can get through. It's kind of a screening process, regardless of how credible that actually is, regardless of how challenging college is. I have my own opinions about that. But I think one thing that will really help boost the credibility of micro-credentials is to make them costly to attain in some way. Maybe not financially costly, but something that does take a little bit of time, something that shows that you're truly committed to learning that skill rather than just like click, 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 okay, because that's not gonna be credible because it doesn't incur a high cost. That's my thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, Helen. I actually have to agree with you so much there about, the signals and the signals we're sending, and to kind of tie that into a point that Faith made about the need for a holistic view of skills and knowledge acquisition, to show, to signal to employers, the whole person. And so I'm really excited. I think y'all are going to hear from Timothy Summers and a digital wallet style ecosystem called Pocket that is meant to show the holistic achievements of learner. So more on that later, but in the meantime, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your perspectives and experiences to enrich our conversations and the actions we take to better serve our learner communities and employers and build that bridge. So thank you, Faith and Helen. Hope to hear from you later. And hopefully you can stay around and chat, because it looks like there's an outpouring of praise and continued questions and conversation in the chat. So thank you so much again. And I'm going to toss it back over to our fearless leader, Stephanie.